Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today, Sourcing Strategies for the Future. My name is Alexander Mazurk with Quint, and I'll be your host during this session. Just want to cover some grounds for the audience before we begin here. I want everybody to know that you're on mute, so we can't hear you, but obviously you can hear us. Using the questions panel, please ask any questions that you may have during any portion of this webinar in the questions panel on your GoToWebinar screen, and we will have a designated portion at the end in which I will read the questions aloud, and our presenters today, Alex and Menzo, will answer them for all to hear at the end. And also, please address any technical problems that you may be having in that same questions box. We'll do everything on our end to make sure that any problems you may be having are alleviated. The duration of today's webinar is going to be approximately a half hour for the presentation, and then we'll allow 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. If we have a good conversation going, we have no problem going later if there's a couple more questions. And at the end, we just want everybody to know that this webinar is being recorded right now, and you will be sent a link sometime after the webinar so you can view it later. So now just a little bit about our organization, Quint, Wellington, Redwood. We are a completely 100% vendor-neutral management consulting firm. That means we're not a BPO, ITO service provider, and we are completely accountable to our clients. Your goals are always highest in mind. We don't have any allegiances to any other outside organizations. It's your goals in mind that are the most important to us. Our organization is completely global. We operate in just about every continent in 50-plus countries around the world. We bring in-depth knowledge of IT. That's our angle. We have in-depth knowledge of software, hardware, cloud, IT service management, agile, lean IT, and DevOps methodologies. Our core businesses include sourcing, architecture, governance, lean IT, and service management, of course. The sourcing and demand supply governance area of our business has been a core business of Quint for a long time. We look beyond outsourcing to all possible solutions in order to help businesses achieve their business goals. And we continue to be a board member with the IAOP. For the last couple years now, they have awarded us one of the world's best outsourcing provider in the areas of the delivery of excellence and programs for innovation. And a little bit about how we work. We work with our customers, often in blended teams, to achieve results. And there's some examples of our customers down there. So our way to work is that we dare to challenge and be challenged. So we challenge both our clients and ourselves to achieve sustainable, measurable organizational change. So that's really the way that we work. It's our mindset. We always want to challenge absolutely everyone and look at every possible solution. We apply results-based contracting to our assignments. We put 25% of our fees at risk at least. So we make sure that we provide results for you. We co-create best fit solutions with both on our side and your side and provide our world-class best practices to ensure sustainable change and improvement. And final off, since a lot of companies we work with are global and we're global as well, we connect people, and we like to accelerate your capabilities by understanding and respecting the geographical and cultural differences that may exist within your organization. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our presenters today, Alex Vandenberg and Menzo Meyer.
Thank you so much. This is Alex Vandenberg. I'm a partner at Quint and responsible for our sourcing advisory practice. I've been in this business for about 20 years, doing a lot of sourcing advisory, insourcing, outsourcing, offshoring, captive centers, integrations, and separations, as you can imagine. I'm extremely delighted to be joined here with one of our most senior consultants in the world, which is Menzo Meyer. He's a principal consultant at our practice, one of the most experienced guys I know. He's been with us for a long time, but he's been in the industry well over 20 years, so I'm extremely happy to be joined by him. So today we're going to talk about sourcing strategies. Thanks all for joining, by the way. We have a big group from around the globe I can see here in my window. So moving ahead with the webinar, just going to the next slide. So Let me start with the takeaways that we have for you today, and we're going to end with them as well. So let me say a couple of things that I want you to take away from this webinar, and we'll give you more detail during the next couple of slides. So one thing I want to mention is outsourcing strategies are wrong by definition, because we like to think of them as sourcing strategies, because a strategy should be in pursuit of business goals. And if you say an outsourcing strategy, that implies that you're already looking at outsourcing as the solution or the way to achieve your business goals. While we say you have to look at outsourcing, insourcing, and other sourcing options as well. Another thing I'd like to point out that this has been done before. Many organizations have been doing this. Your organization have been doing this, and there's evolving views on how it should be done. And today we're going to share the latest and greatest with you on that. Often when organizations are looking at a sourcing strategy, their primary goal or focus is on cutting cost. And although in some areas that may be a very viable goal to have, I want to stress that if you focus on that goal alone, it will not bring you the value that it can bring to you. So we think cost cutting is important. It shouldn't be the only sourcing driver, and we'll give you some examples later on. In general, differentiating between your services, the business value and they bring, will result in different ways of sourcing within your organization that I want to touch upon later. In other words, there's no one-size-fits-all model that is there to put in place. So let me take a step back and see some of the developments that have impacted our economy, society, and also impact IT and operations, where most of the sourcing is taking place today. So on the left side of your screen, you see some major developments in society and the economy as a whole, and on the right side, you see the developments that we see in IT and operations, and we'll link them to sourcing later on. So starting with the developments on society and economy, hyperconnectivity is something that's really been changing the world around us. So because everyone is connected, because stuff is being bought, services and stuff are being bought through the internet, and you know, powered by social media, you see the life cycle of new products and services has been shortened dramatically. So usually you have this phase of early adopters and fast followers and stuff like that. And if you look like 5 or 10 years ago, that process will take months or years. And if you look at it right now with the hyper-connected world, a new product or service, it succeeds or fails within a couple of weeks or months. So the pace has been increased dramatically. On that change flow, new technology is disturbing some traditional markets. So you see your typical examples there. Uber is a great example of something that's been disturbing the market that wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago with less technology. Globalization is there, and sustainability is something that is growing in the market. So it's making money is still an important thing, and we do it all the time, but we're more looking to balance the profit with the people and the planet, because the recognition is there that, you know, we don't have a planet, there's not much use of having a lot of profit. Moving to some developments we see in IT and operations, specifically analytics and big data. This is linked to both hyperconnectivity and social, as well as new technologies. So this has a potential to be a gold mine for organizations, although if not managed correctly, it's more of a maze in which to get lost. Another thing is there's cloud. It's been hyped tremendously the past couple of years, and it's been growing. However, in our view, we don't see a cloud-only strategy for most of the currently existing organizations before 2020. There are exceptions there, but most organizations will have to look at a hybrid cloud environment because of the current existing systems that they have. Another big development in IT and operations that you're probably all working on are agile and DevOps, which cater to the time of market that is needed for these short innovation cycles that the hyperconnectivity, socioeconomic development has been pushing. And the fourth one we wanted to mention here is robotics, which is both in IT as well as operations, brings hyper-automation, which is an incredible form of increasing efficiency and cutting cost and slowing throughput times, However, it brings some challenges in the longer term in terms of vendor lock-in, as well as the increasing complexity of your ecosystem if you add robots to it. So here are some of the developments that we've seen. Now let's move on what kind of problems they have been causing in some sourcing strategies. So we feel there have been some approaches to sourcing strategies that have led to solutions that aren't quite comfortable. A couple of those we've seen in practice at some of the organizations we've helped to actually move away from these strategies. So this is one we've seen a lot in both North America as well as Northern Europe, which is offshoring. And offshoring in itself, it can be a great solution in some parts, but we see some organizations taking it a little bit too far, offshoring everything to India, and then taking 40% of the workforce on site to make sure you still have some agility and are able to interact with them. Now, that is not the most powerful way in which an offshore scenario should work. So this is typically a symptom of an organization that's been taking it too far. We see that the demand in most organizations is quite differentiated, and then sourcing or procurement might push that in one sourcing model. That doesn't fit. Another thing which is a big challenge that we see is pricing models that incentivize suppliers in a way that's not aligned to the behavior and objectives of the business. The fourth one is, if you put too many procedures in place of your provider, if you micromanage the provider to a level that he or she cannot make their own decisions on innovation or improvement of processes, you're going to end up with a suboptimal solution. And the last one is, making sourcing decisions without considering the architecture and current prospects of your IT is a recipe for disaster. The sourcing strategy should cover IT. You should look at the current systems that are there and the possibilities that are in those systems. So I want to hand it over now. So I've put all those problems here on the webinar. I want to hand over now to Menzo to talk about some useful tools and solutions for how to create a strategy that fits with all these demands and processes.
Hi, thank you, Alex. What I can show you is that we use a lot of times the Quint sourcing lifecycle framework, and as you can see, it consists of three cycles, and the first one is the sourcing strategy, and we're today talking about that topic. The second, which should be the next phase, is a sourcing initiative where you kind of in or outsource a particular service. And then the third, of course, is the phase of where you manage the contract and you manage the service during the lifetime and the duration of the contract. What I'm about to tell you today is that we see in the sourcing strategy that you can, we always start with the trigger is the business and the IT strategy. Then we do an assessment on the current situation. We see all the risk and pitfalls and possibilities. What's extremely important to have the right stakeholders on the table, because it's not a matter only of IT or only a matter of procurement. Senior management should be involved. HR, if there's transfer of people included. You have to decide which objective and principles, and today we're going to talk about somewhat on that topic. Then we create a service sourcing map, and what we believe is the service sourcing map is the key element of our of making a sourcing strategy. How it works, I will show you that on the next slides. And what you can do with it is, first of all, you can point out what your business value per domain is. And the domain is, for instance, logistics or procurement or sales or manufacturing. The second is that you can decide what is the most appropriate way of sourcing. And the third is that you can create service lot. And service lot is a combination of services which you put on the table in one sourcing initiative, and you want to have that delivered by one provider, so you can make smart combinations of that. And of course that if you see below the service sourcing map the providers landscape, you create a landscape. What we often see is that we have this unorganized number of providers with overlaps in contracts and no responsibilities, etc., for the whole chain. If you have done that, then you create an appropriate governance framework where you can allocate the responsibilities. Then you create a strategic business case, emphasis on strategic because it's not the nuts and bolts and the details of the business case. You will have to make that during the process of a sourcing initiative, and you end up with a service, with a sourcing roadmap. Excuse me. So how does it look like a service sourcing map? What you see on the colored areas, you first see the primary domain. As I mentioned, it could be banking, it could be a payment, the mortgages. The business support domain is typically HR or finance. It's supporting the process. You can't do without it, but you will not earn money with it. And then you have the third, the generic area, where you can have the office automation, collaboration tools, that kind of stuff. So these are the vertical areas. Then the horizontals you see at the bottom is the infrastructure, the application layer, the information layer, because application at the end of the day should provide and process information, and on their turn they support the business process. So probably you will be kind of curious how it works. Well, the first step is that you point out what the business value per domain is. In the introduction we mentioned that we don't see that it's beneficial to have a one-size-fits-no-one sourcing strategy. So you should point out that different service domain, it looks like a no-brainer, but again, we see a lot of bad examples where you don't see the distinction between the different business values and the service which is linked to that. So for instance, what we often see is that we have at the bottom, I see that's an error, that should be infrastructure at the bottom. So the infrastructure is mostly concerned with efficiency and reliability. It needs to create a platform for all the applications which should run on that platform. And the efficiency, of course, that should be in every domain, but then you see a distinction that effectiveness, which is in fact client focused, of course the primary domain should be ultimately client focused, whereas the business support domain, there should be a business case. If you want to have a specific financial report, it can be beneficial, but normally you would see that you use more standardized tools which are provided by the providers and which are on the market. And for generic, of course you cannot and will not build your own PowerPoint solution or something like that. And agility and the innovativeness in the primary domain, that depends on the branch you're working in. But then you see, if you make a distinction, then it kind of you kind of create a picture where you can see and concentrate and link the different ways of sourcing, which I can show you in the next slide. First of all, there is a kind of mixture between a lot of, let's say, words are used, because a lot of people and organizations think that their primary application cannot be outsourced or should not be outsourced. And what we see is a difference between core, what we see as the identity, which creates a competitive edge, and you should have in-house key competencies, and possibly you could have additions by external staff, but preferably not to outsource it. Then another argument that is time critical. Of course, when you are on the trading, in the trading business, downtime of even seconds can have dramatic consequences. And outsourcing can be beneficial, because if you have a service provider which has 24/7 the whole year around, they have disaster recovery in place, they monitor it all the time, and it's even better than you can do it that in-house. And by the way, is that the thing where you earn your money? If that's the case, then you should put extra management on that, but still it's not a reason to outsource it. And primary, of course, that is the reason why you can be a company, a bank, processes the payments. You can have all kinds of that examples. But on the other hand, it could be highly standardized. So it could be that you have a primary process which is actually standardized, and there are a lot of opportunities and technologies out there on the market which you could buy it off the shelf, because primary by definition does not create competitive edge. It could be, by the way, but it could be not. And then key operational, well, the word by itself, it says that it's more like transactional work. It's mostly repeatable, well-structured, and in that case, outsourcing can be beneficial as well. So again, there is no reason why you should exclude your primary domain from the start, and you should consider the possibilities and benefits you can create by sourcing or in-house. On this slide, it's more like a complex picture. This is an example of a service sourcing map where you can see in the right hand of the slide, you can see the various ways of sourcing: in-house delivery, staff augmentation, outsourcing, a shared service center, which could be external or internal, like internal, that all the business units concentrate their, for instance, their financial services in one place, or their generic office automation. And at the bottom you see the strategic alliance. And what you see here, that we take into account various ways of sourcing, so it's not only black and white, in or outsource, where you put per service, you will define and decide what's the best way of sourcing is. And you can see with the various colors that you can put it as, you can decide on even the smallest level of the highest level of detail. What we advise is that we keep the blocks of the services not too small, because that will create a lot of management to tie it all together. And the third, what I promised, is the third thing you can do with this service sourcing map is that you can create service lots. And in this example, all the lots here are then allocated to one provider. You see at the bottom the hosting, services and storage, the middleware for the various domains, a cloud solution for the office, and technical application management for the primary application. Again, this is just an example. And what you can see is that the service sourcing map, if you create it, then this is the heart of your sourcing strategy, not a black and white, and you decide which business value by which service should be created. Then Alex, over to you.
Yes, so I'm going to share with you a example of a sourcing strategy on a higher level that we've seen with one of our clients. So we were looking at the business goals and the drivers there, and we found out there were two main drivers and that were determining the demarcations in the service map. So we were looking at two drivers there. You can see them on the left side of the screen. One is external exposure, that could be high or low. So for instance, a mobile app would be in the high external exposure area because a lot of people, users, clients would use that. And a back office system could be in the low external exposure area, which would only be used by the organization itself. And then we have the unpredictability of changes. So the unpredictability of changes could be high in some segments and it could be low. So low would be an example for let's say, a system where any changes are seen well in advance. So this could be certain data processing that you have every year that you know that's going to happen in December or something like that. So from that, we've created 3 tiers of services. The top tier services are the services that are most exposed to external clients and stakeholders, and are also have unpredictable changes. So you can find these again in mobile apps, marketing kind of things, sales kind of things, where you need maximum agility. And then we have the base tier services at the bottom, where we said the external exposure is not very high, and we can pretty much predict most of the changes some weeks or sometimes even months in advance. And then you have the middle tier services, which is the gray area in between. So what we did with that is we created the service maps, somewhat similar to what Menzo just shown you a minute ago, and we've linked these tiers to different business goals. So let me start with the base services at the bottom. So again, the base services the changes can be predicted reasonably well, and the external exposure is quite low. So for this services, we said the goal should be efficiency, reliability, and cost cutting. So what we did was we outsourced that to larger vendors. Try to transform as much as possible to the standard of the vendor. We go for scale. We try to create lesser cost, higher efficiency, higher reliability on that scale. So it was, for a large part, a cost game, an operational excellence game, as a zero defect game. If you go to the top tier services on the top of the slide, you find, it's about innovation, it's about direct results, it's about time to market, etc. So what we did there was we did most of the stuff in-house, but we sourced some very specific top expertise in the marketplace. So we're talking about a staff augmentation, hiring the top minds in the market that are out there for a small period of time, but keep most of the gold, if you will, in-house. So the goal was there, combine your own expertise with the top expertise in the market, maximize speed and market disruption. So as you can see on the right, it's about innovation and agility. Cost is not an issue. We were hiring, we had some contracts there, some external contracts there for a couple of, some tens of FTEs. So it was fine if that was 10 or 20% or even 50% more expensive as long as the quality was good. Where in the base services, we were talking hundreds of employees and hundreds of staff, and every percent we could get off there would be wonderful in terms of cost. So this is an example sourcing strategy that we wanted to share with you that greatly views how you can have multiple goals, multiple objectives that are different per tier of service that you're sourcing. Which brings us back to the key takeaways of today's session. Outsourcing strategies are wrong by definition because they look at outsourcing only. You have to appreciate this has been done before, and there's much to learn from organizations that are out there that have done this in the past. Cost cutting is important, but shouldn't be the only driver. As shown by Menzo in the service map example and by the example I showed you last slide, cost cutting can be fine in certain domains or certain tiers, but in other domains it doesn't make any sense. Differentiation is there because there's no one-size-fits-all model. And I think that's the key takeaway of today's webinar and the lesson and experience that we wanted to share with you. So I'm handing over back to our host, Alexander Mezarek. Alexander, any questions from the audience so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for the great presentation today. Just want to remind the audience that the Q&A box is still open, so if you have any questions now, go ahead and ask them. And if any questions here spur some inspiration, go ahead and we can piggyback off an answer before. But here's the first question. It is, if I use a more subtle sourcing strategy, will that still offer enough scale for a service provider?
That's a great question, Alexander. Let me try and give an answer to that. So, once you obviously, if you work with some strategic providers, if you're in an outsourcing situation, you need to have a certain amount of scale for them. So I think our message is not kind of cut the domains or the lots into such small pieces that that's a per se a best of breed scenario. We're not saying that at all. So you have certain tiers or certain domains, for instance, might be in your infrastructure or in your base services, etc., where you want to create some scale for your service provider if you outsource them. And scale means put the eggs a little bit in one basket for that area. Because at some point your partners, especially if you're looking at cost cutting or operational excellence, they will need some scale. However, for the more differentiated parts where you may not be focused as much on cost, you can keep the scale relatively small. Even for a service provider, if that service provider can provide top-notch services to you at a reasonable price with a reasonable margin, he's not going to need the scale he might need if the costs and margins are much lower. So you can be this top innovative customer for him. He can make a nice margin offer you, which is fair, and the scale might not be perfect. It could still be fine. But at the end of the day, if you look into the domains where you go for operational excellence and cost cutting, yes, you're gonna need to have a certain amount of scale, and if you don't have it, you're gonna have to put some domains together to achieve that scale. So that would be my advice there. Any other questions?
Yes. It is, how long does it typically take to design a sourcing strategy like you outlined?
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for that question. What we see is that a very high-speed sourcing strategy would take you, let's say, 1 month in a typical simple and small situation, small organization, whereas a more complex international strategy would take you a couple of months. Again, we're not in favor of defining it to the lowest level of detail. It should create an overview, it should create an action plan, a roadmap, and because you are still, you can still along the way take all kinds of wise decisions, stop a sourcing initiative because it could be that along the way the cost benefits are much lower than you've expected. And of course, the world changes all the time. So again, we're not in favor of this long project where you take 1 year to define a sourcing strategy. So I would say 2 until 4 months at the max.
All right, terrific. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it for the questions today, unless anybody has another one coming in. We'll go ahead and wrap things up. I just want to thank everybody for making it to our webinar today, Sourcing Strategies for the Future. Here's our methods to contact us. Reach out to us by any of those methods. If you have any inquiries whatsoever, you can even ask for Alex or Menzo directly if you wanted to discuss something like sourcing strategy. Please check out our website as well. It's www.quintgroup.com. In the events section, you can see the schedule for our upcoming webinars, and in the Knowledge Center, that's where we keep some of our white papers that are on sourcing strategy, lean IT, service management, etc. in there. And we're active on just about every social media channel if you wish to follow us. I just want to thank Alex and Menzo again today. Thanks, guys, and to everybody who joined us, thank you and have a great day.